Alrighty, back again, and we were talking about the fact that the Lotus Sutra focuses on Upaya and Ekayana, two very important Mahayana topics, and I want to read a little bit to you here from Skilton. The earliest date ascertainable for this sutra is between 100 BCE and 100 CE. It is a composite text showing an overall division into two sections, the first relating to Upaya and Ekayana, and the latter to the lifespan of the Buddha. Upaya, or skillful means, is a central teaching of the sutra and describes the way in which the Buddha adapts his teaching to the disposition, adimukti, of his hearers, which means that the value of a teaching is relative to its result. The doctrine became the primary means used to account for the varied teachings of the sutras, since those which were not thought to teach the ultimate truth, Paramartha Satya, were seen as upaya of the Buddha. The teaching of Ekayana, one way, maintains that the three yanas, the Shravaka yana, the way of the hearers or the disciples of the non-Mahayana schools, in other words, the Arhats, the Pratyeka Buddha yana, the way of Buddhas who achieve awakening on their own and do not teach. Okay, I'm going to pause for a minute here. The Pratyeka Buddha, this is a very interesting figure that shows up as an ideal in the early period. So during the Nikaya section of Buddhism, where Arhats are the ideal, Pratyeka Buddhas are also an idealized figure. Pratyeka literally means eka, meaning one, prati, among. So a Pratyeka Buddha is basically a party of one who becomes enlightened through his, unfortunately, efforts and doesn't teach anybody else. And that's the difference between a Buddha and a Pratyeka Buddha. Of course, the Buddha is one who becomes awakened through his own efforts and then teaches others. A Pratyeka Buddha is one who achieves enlightenment on their own and they don't teach. An Arhat is one who becomes enlightened through a Buddha or because of a Buddha's teachings, and then they teach other people. So those are kind of the elements that define these different categories of enlightened person. Okay, so the Shravaka yana, which is the disciples of the early period of Buddhism, the Nikaya period, the Pratyeka Buddha yana, the way of Buddhas who achieve awakening on their own and do not teach, and the Bodhisattva yana. The Bodhisattva yana being the teaching of the Bodhisattvas, meaning the teaching that happens during the Mahayana period when the Bodhisattva is the ideal. Okay? Even though you have these three, there is only one yana. The previous yanas were just upaya, accommodations made by the Buddha to the various abilities and levels of spiritual development of different people. Among the reasons for the extensive popularity of this sutra, and the Lotus Sutra is a beloved sutra and still a very beloved sutra among many, many different sects of Buddhism, where they understand that the crystallization of all Buddhist teaching is in the Lotus Sutra. Okay, so among the reasons for the extensive popularity of this sutra must be included its dramatic format and extensive use of parables. Who doesn't like a parable? To illustrate Upaya and Ekayana. Great advantages are said to arise for those who praise and disseminate the sutra, and in China and Japan it was thought to possess magical powers. I love this. This idea that by reciting a text one actually gains merit. You have that all through Hinduism, where certain texts like the Bhagavad Gita, by reciting it you are gaining purity. Here in the Buddhist tradition, by reciting certain sutras and by praising certain sutras, it's a form of sutra worshipping really, one gains great merit. So these texts kind of have this magical character all into themselves. Okay, so that's what I wanted to read to you, and what I am next going to describe is a very interesting fork in the road that we have during this Mahayana period. And the fork in the road looks like this, okay? You come into the Mahayana period. The Mahayana period is one that in which we can see a bridge sect. And what do I mean by that? The Nikaya sect of the Lokottara-Vadins, remember those guys? The guys who literally put Uttara, the Buddha, above the world. Okay, Lokottara, that's what that means, above the world. So the Buddha is really a divine figure, not just a human. He just keeps acting like a human and brushing his teeth and taking a bath and eating food because he wants to look as though he's just a human, but in fact the Buddha is beyond human beings. He's supranormal. Okay, the Lokottara-Vadins were one of the 18 sects, and we can see them as a bridge sect into the Mahayana because this idea of elevating the Buddha to a divine status is something that you see all over the Mahayana texts. Okay? However, here's the Lokottara-Vada Buddha, right here at the juncture of these two forks, one fork with two directions. Okay? If you go down in this way, on one side, you've got the idea that really, even though the Buddha appears in many ways, all you really have is non-duality. In other words, the Buddha and us and everything, nothing in this world has any svabhava or substance to itself. The Buddha doesn't, the gods don't, you don't, nobody does. And as a result, what really matters and what really exists is dharma shunyata. Shunyata meaning emptiness, as you know, dharma meaning the reality that we live in. So the reality that is really real, that if we had the eyes to see, we could see, is one of vital energy in which everything is one. Everything is connected. Okay? Nothing exists beyond or outside of that or next to that. Okay? So, in the Perfection of Wisdom Sutras, you very much see this idea of dharma shunyata. In the Trikaya theory, which I discussed last week, the three bodies of the Buddha that are similar to the Trinity in Christianity, in that you still see this emptiness of ultimate reality, because you've got the Dharmakaya that further evokes the Sambhogakaya, or the body of bliss, that communicative energy that derives from the Dharmakaya, but through which one can visualize enlightened energy. And then third from that, you have the Nirmanakaya, or what looks like the body of the Buddha. But the Nirmanakaya into the Sambhogakaya fold right back, telescope back in a reverse fashion, back into the Dharmakaya, because nothing is separate. All is one. Okay? Now, the next fork, the direction for the other side of this fork, I should say, is the fact that the Lokottara Buddha, the Lokottara-Vadin's image of the Buddha, is of a divine Buddha who can help you, who somehow exists beyond you. And this is where we get into the Pure Land traditions, which you read about for today. Okay? In the Pure Land tradition, which has taken a different fork, you have Buddhas and Bodhisattvas that reside in a place called the Pure Land, which is a place that is suffused with Dharma. It smells wonderful. Your favorite kind of foods. Everything is great. You see a bunch of your friends up there. Non-stop greatness. And it is so suffused with Dharma that you die, get reborn into the Pure Land if you're really lucky, and I'll tell you how you do that. And because you're in the Pure Land and it's suffused with Dharma, you become enlightened while you're in the Pure Land. And then the next stop is straight off to Nirvana. So basically, the Pure Land looks a lot like heaven, But rather than being the ultimate stop on the Buddhist trail, it is understood in this context to be the penultimate stop, because you get enlightened in the Pure Land. Now, how do you get to the Pure Land to begin with? This is going to really piss you guys off for the most part. The way that you get into the Pure Land is first to be born a male. Okay, and then not that that's a bad thing, but it's a little frustrating for the ladies. Okay, to first be born a male, and then through worshiping and reciting and being grateful to two Buddhas in particular, one named Amitabha, another one named Akshobhya. They are understood to exist in these Pure Lands, one in the Eastern Pure Land, one in the Western Pure Land. By being grateful and by worshiping one of these figures, you will be magnetized by them into the Pure Land. So here we have a wonderful departure from what the Buddha taught, and a moment that I said you're going to see in all religious traditions, the motif through which worshippers externalize the means of their salvation onto something outside of themselves. Happens in Christianity, happens in Confucianism, happens in Taoism, happens in Hinduism. It happens all over the place, where you have a path that is first thought to only be about you. And what I mean by that, not super selfish, but just one in which your salvation depends on you. There's nothing outside of you to get you into the goal, and in Buddhism's case, enlightenment being that goal. Two, a place where you are now praying, reciting the names of these Buddhas in order that they might attract you into their Pure Land, and from there you become enlightened. So two very different spokes that come out of this Mahayana time period. One that is non-dualistic, and I'm going to tell you right now that path, the non-dualistic path in the Mahayana tradition, is where we see Tibetan Buddhism coming, which is what we're going to discuss next week. And the other path being one of dualism, where you have basically what are really devotional movements to particular Buddhas that are thought to exist beyond the worshipper. Okay? All right, so those are two very, very important things. The last thing I'm going to say here today, because I think I'm coming up on my limit, is that you've got this wonderful parable of the burning house in the Lotus Sutra, where the Buddha talks about upaya, where the parable is one that defines upaya and ekayana. Okay? Then you have another wonderful story that is also part of your reading for today, and that is the one about the Nagi princess. Okay? And it's a story of a Nagi princess, this magical being. Nagas are cobras, basically, snakes, that are believed to be able to transform into human form but have some bit of the snake remaining, like a big hood on the back like a cobra has. Okay, so anyway, this Nagi princess, a girl, a snake, and a little girl. So youth, femaleness, and animalness, basically, are seen to be able to, this figure is able to transform into an enlightened being. And while there's a moment in the story where she has to become a male on this incredibly quick transformation she does into an enlightened being, the thing that I want you to be able to take away from it is to see that in that story you've got these Mahayana thinkers saying, okay, you may have to become a male if you're a female of some type, but you only have to be a male for a second, and you don't have to be reborn as a male. You can actually transform from female to male. And so it's a story really that's really kind of a good feminist story out of the Mahayana movement, in which even something as disenfranchised on some level as a non-human young female can, in the lifetime of having those elements, can become enlightened. Okay? So enjoy your reading, and good luck. Good luck with all of it. Hope you're having a good week.